Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump hosts the Irish Prime Minister in the Oval Office. The visit comes as trade tensions are escalating between the U.S. and European nations as both sides hit each other with new tariffs. Iris Tao at the White House. Trump defends his decision to reduce the size of the Department of Education as part of his effort to return oversight of schools to individual states. Jason Blair has more on that, plus the president's comments on inflation and the economy. Senate Democrats are divided over government funding ahead of the Friday deadline, with some saying a shutdown could empower President Trump. That's as House Democrats urge them to unite against a stopgap bill. Luis Martinez has the latest. U.S. officials are getting ready to travel to Moscow to present a proposal for a ceasefire deal with Ukraine. Aaron Pasdar has what President Trump says about the status of peace talks. And residents in Syria deal with the aftermath of over 1,000 people reportedly killed in sectarian violence. Meanwhile, it's now more than a week since Israel began blocking aid to the Gaza Strip, and there's no end in sight. Jason Perry reports.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump welcomes Irish leader Micheál Martin to the White House ahead of St. Patrick's Day, but it comes as trade tensions are escalating between the U.S. and European nations as both sides hit each other with new tariffs. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
So we have tremendous business relationships with Ireland. What's with these? It's
in honor of the Taoiseach.
I'm trying to stay focused, but I'm very impressed with the VP's.
A lighter atmosphere compared with the last foreign visit.
You don't have the cards.
But tensions are on the rise over trade and tariffs as President Trump criticizes the EU and Ireland for taking advantage of the U.S.
The EU was set up in order to take advantage of the United States. When the pharmaceutical companies started to go to Ireland, I would have said, that's okay if you want to go to Ireland. I think it's great. But if you want to sell anything into the United States, I'm going to put a 200% tariff on you.
In Canada and the EU, which Ireland is part of, hit back at the latest U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum by taxing American products such as bourbon and motorcycles. President Trump vows,
Of course I'm going to respond.
adding his tariffs are necessary to stop unfair trade and that he has the right to adjust them as needed.
It's not called inconsistency, it's called flexibility. But there will be very little flexibility once we start. April 2nd is going to be a very big day.
After falling for 2 days amid uncertainty around tariffs, stocks closed higher on Wednesday as new report shows inflation cooling more than expected. Trump, calling it good news, says markets will soar when they see the impact of cuts to taxes and regulations.
I tell you, there's tremendous optimism out there about our country in terms of regulations being cut, in terms of taxes being cut.
And on Thursday, U.S. and Canadian officials are set to meet in Washington to talk about an update to the U.S.-MCA trade agreement. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And while meeting with the Irish Prime Minister, President Trump defended his decision to make large cuts to the Department of Education. He also said he thinks the economy is heading in a positive direction. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us more from Washington, D.C.
President Trump sounded optimistic when asked about the state of the economy at the White House. He said he thinks the dip in the stock market recently is more related to the past 4 years. The president touted how the cost of eggs recently dropped almost 30% and said that cost will be going down for energy soon.
Oil is down to $65 a barrel, and that's faster than I would have anticipated. When energy comes down, prices are going to be coming down with it. So in a very short period of time, we've done a very good job.
And when asked about the cuts at the Department of Education, the president says that he really stands by the new Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, says he thinks she's doing a good job. And he did give some insight on how some of those decisions were made for the cuts.
I feel very badly, but many of them don't work at all. Many of them never showed up to work. When we cut, we want to cut, but we want to cut the people that aren't working or not doing a good job. We're keeping the best people.
The president also reiterated his intention to ultimately have states run education instead of, quote, bureaucrats working in Washington. The Trump administration also announced that it started rolling back on the Biden administration rule to have car makers drastically reduce carbon emissions for car models starting in 2027 for light and medium-sized vehicles. This is something Republicans have called a de facto electric vehicle mandate. The Environmental Protection Agency made this announcement on Wednesday, calling it the largest deregulatory announcement in American history.
EPA will be reconsidering many suffocating rules that restrict nearly every sector of our economy and cost Americans trillions of dollars.
This announcement isn't too much of a surprise. On the campaign trail, President Trump did promise to roll back on the Biden administration's fuel efficiency rules. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And President Trump seems to be backing off from his plan to shut down the Department of Education, saying at a recent press briefing that it's a process. Can he unilaterally dissolve an agency by executive order? Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards explores.
There seems to be some confusion about what powers the President of the United States has and when he can use them. Can the President of the United States dissolve an entire federal department by executive order? President Donald Trump has said he wants to eliminate the Department of Education. Many legal experts have said the president doesn't have the constitutional authority to dissolve government agencies because Congress has the power to make federal departments, and only they can remove them. Article 1 of the Constitution does in fact grant Congress the power to make the laws that create agencies. It states that Congress has the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Which means Congress can make laws that create agencies, or they can grant powers to others, like the president, to establish these agencies. For example, in 1979, then-President Jimmy Carter proposed establishing a cabinet-level Department of Education. The proposal had to pass the scrutiny of the Senate and the House. After a flurry of debate and some compromise, both houses passed the proposed bill, and President Carter signed it into law, thus granting Carter the power to establish the Department of Education. So if the president can't independently create an agency, can he direct others to dissolve it? There's nothing in the Constitution nor any laws written by Congress that explicitly say the president can issue directives through executive orders. Article 2 of the Constitution states that the president is the commander-in-chief, and he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. It's understood that the president has broad powers in areas such as control and operation of the federal government, federal agencies, and in foreign affairs. In other words, the president has a broad ability to issue directives as an inherent aspect of presidential power. So far, Trump's issued executive orders that direct the Education Department to end certain programs, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what Trump calls the radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling. Now, past presidents have used this inherent power to issue executive orders as a way to get around congressional scrutiny. For example, President Barack Obama's strategy for achieving his intended goals was through executive orders. In 2014, after months of the House failing to pass a bill that would grant legal status to millions of illegal immigrants, Obama signed an executive order, which did just that. President Ronald Reagan was also known to use executive orders to accomplish his goals. He signed an executive order to create the Grace Commission, which was tasked with rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse. Reagan saved more than $100 billion by implementing Grace Commission proposals through executive orders. It's unclear whether President Trump can dissolve an entire agency through an executive order. It's also unclear whether or not he has to have approval from Congress. But what is clear Past presidents have routinely used executive orders to achieve their goals rather than waiting for Congress.
House Democrats urge their Senate counterparts to reject the continuing resolution ahead of the Friday deadline. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
I don't know why anyone would support that bill. The House Democratic position is crystal clear, as evidenced by the strong vote of opposition that we took yesterday on the House floor.
House Democrats are very clear. We're asking Senate Democrats to vote no on this continuing resolution, which is not clean.
House Democrats began their 3-day annual policy retreat in Leesburg, Virginia this Wednesday, showing unity in their opposition to President Trump's legislative agenda and sending a strong message to Senate Democrats.
And that's why our message to the Senate is also stand with us on that side. And we think that our vote gives the Senate the strength and the message they need to stand up as well.
The House of Representatives is in recess, and the Senate has until Friday at midnight to vote on the House's continuing resolution or face a government shutdown on their watch.
Shutdowns are bad. We're seeing what the market's doing to pensions this week, and other uncertainty in the markets will just hurt people that have been playing by the rules and working hard. Look, I think these are two bad products, bad environments that provide more chaos and uncertainty to the American people.
Republicans will need the support of at least 7 Democrats to pass the stopgap bill through the Senate floor, and Democrats are divided over supporting it.
I think most voters care more about how this is going to affect their everyday lives. They aren't going to get into the weeds about constraining Trump or anything of that nature.
If you shut down the government, the president is the person who decides what is essential. He decides what part of the government stays open. So you're actually giving him even more power. So I haven't made up my mind, but I think that the continuing resolution is awful.
It is worth mentioning that Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire announced this Wednesday that she will not seek re-election in 2026, becoming the 3rd Democratic senator to do so before the midterm elections. Reporting from Leesburg, Virginia, Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The White House says we're closer than ever to achieving peace in Ukraine. This as U.S. officials are getting ready to present a ceasefire plan to Russia. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pozdar has the Ukraine update.
And hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia. And if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath finished. It's a bloodbath.
President Trump on Wednesday suggesting that getting Russia to accept a ceasefire would be the first and most important step to end the fighting in Ukraine. On Tuesday, Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposed by the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington is now going to present the details of the plan to Moscow, telling them Ukraine is ready to stop all battlefield activity.
And we'll see what the response is. If their response is yes, then we know we've made real progress and there's a real chance of peace. If their response is no, it would be highly unfortunate and it would make their intentions clear.
The White House says Special Envoy to Ukraine and Russia, Steve Witkoff, is getting ready to present the ceasefire proposal to Russian officials in person.
Mr. Witkoff is traveling to Moscow later this week, and we urge the Russians to sign on to this plan. This is the closest we have been to peace in this war.
Meanwhile, Trump warns that the U.S. could increase tensions if Russia decides to keep the war going.
I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace. I want to see peace, and we'll see. But in a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he welcomes the ceasefire proposal and that it's now up to Moscow to accept the deal and work towards peace, although he didn't name Russia directly.
Today, it depends on this country 100%, because America has demonstrated its steps and its position. Ukraine has demonstrated its position.
Multiple U.S. officials and President Trump have expressed agreement, saying the ball is now in Russia's court. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
It's been more than a week since Israel began blocking humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, and there's currently no end in sight. Meanwhile, residents in Syria are dealing with the aftermath of over 1,000 people reportedly killed in sectarian violence. NTD's Jason Perry has the Middle East update.
Trucks carrying humanitarian aid were seen lined up outside the Gaza Strip on Wednesday, unable to deliver food. Israel began blocking humanitarian aid to the territory over a week ago, saying Hamas was using the aid to help conduct terrorist activity. An Egyptian truck driver shared his thoughts on the situation.
I only wish we would be allowed in so they can eat. And even if I die, I have no problem. I sacrifice for them.
Meanwhile, President Trump clarified his stance on the situation in Gaza, saying, quote, "Nobody is expelling any Palestinians." And he added this.
Israel has been under siege, as you can see, and they had to fight back. October 7th was a terrible thing. People don't like to mention it, but it was a terrible, terrible day in the life of the world. We're working hard with Israel. We're working hard to see if we can solve the problem.
Trump also recently sent a letter to the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, seeking to jumpstart talks over Iran's rapidly advancing nuclear program. But before receiving Trump's letter, Khamenei said it was an attempt to deceive global public opinion. This comes as public opinion may be changing toward the new Syrian government after over 1,000 people were reportedly killed in sectarian violence in the country, most of whom were Alawites. Alawism is an offshoot of Shiite Islam.
We truly lived a day of horror, real horror. Everyone was scared and terrified. Nobody dared to leave their house.
And in an effort to curtail the violence, the new Syrian government signed a breakthrough ceasefire deal with the Kurdish-led authority that would merge the Kurdish forces in Syria into the Syrian army. Meanwhile, Israel's deputy foreign minister blames Syria's leader for the sectarian violence in Syria, saying he's part of a jihadist Islamist terrorist group known as HTS, a former al-Qaeda affiliate. Israel's defense minister gave a message to Syria's president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, saying the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, will remain in Syria indefinitely.
Every morning when Syrian interim president Ahmad al-Sharaa opens his eyes in the presidential palace in Damascus, he will see the IDF watching him from the heights of Mount Hermon.
He also confirmed that Israel recently struck at least 40 military targets in southern Syria. Jason Perry, NTD News.
Coming up, the detained captain of the cargo ship that collided with a U.S. oil tanker off the coast of England is a Russian national. Monday's collision saw both ships on fire. Malcolm Hudson reports from London. And author Gordon Chang explains why China's plans go beyond domination and what it means for the U.S. Chris Bob has more from New York. And the pair of American astronauts stranded in space could soon be returning to Earth. SpaceX is slated to launch its official rescue mission tonight. We'll hear what folks in D.C. think about this when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A Russian national has been revealed as the captain of the ship that collided with a U.S. jet fuel tanker on the English coast. Monday's collision saw both ships on fire, but environmental concerns have eased with reports that pollution has been limited. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us.
The captain of a ship that hit a U.S. jet fuel tanker off the coast of northeast England has now been revealed to be a Russian national. That's according to Ernst Russ, the German company that owns the Portuguese-flagged Solong ship. The rest of the 14-strong crew, one of whom is missing and presumed dead, are a mix of Russian and Filipino nationals. British police on Tuesday arrested the Solong's 59-year-old captain on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. He hasn't been charged. Police are continuing their inquiries. The Solong on Monday crashed into the Stena Immaculate tanker, which was carrying 220,000 barrels of jet fuel for the US military. The collision left a gaping hole in the Stena Immaculate. The 23-strong crew who were on board the Stena were all evacuated safely. They were reported to be Americans. British Transport Minister Mike Cain said on Tuesday there was no evidence of foul play. Shadow Transport Minister Jerome Mayhew on Wednesday said the nationality of the Solong's captain raises further questions about the potential motivation behind the incident. He said, "Where military assets are damaged, it is vital that motives are fully investigated to exclude foul play." The collision caused huge fires and explosions and leaked fuel into the sea. British Coast Guard said fires on the Solong have greatly reduced, while there were no visible flames at the Stena Immaculate. The Stena Immaculate was operating as part of the US government's tanker security program, a group of commercial vessels that can be contracted to carry fuel for the military when needed. Crowley, the maritime company managing the Stena Immaculate, said a jet fuel spill from the vessel has had a limited impact. It remains unclear how much jet fuel was released, but an initial review shows it had evaporated due to exposure to fires on both vessels. The British Coast Guard said on Wednesday that there had been no further reports of pollution from either vessel since then. The operators of the vessels and maritime authorities have yet to offer an explanation of why multiple safety systems on board the vessels failed to prevent the collision. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
The Metropolitan Republican Club hosted an event last night in New York titled Combating Communist China, an evening with Gordon Chang. NTD's Chris Bobb spoke with Chang, a China expert, about several topics.
I'm here at the Metropolitan Republican Club on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where an event was just held called Combating Communist China, an evening with Gordon Chang. We spoke to Gordon as well as the event organizer. Here's what they had to say.
Club means the world to me. It's the oldest Republican club in all of New York. We have incredible events such as tonight's event with Gordon Chang. I think we all know we are in the midst of a culture war as well as a literal trade war with China right now, dealing with tariffs, dealing with the fact that China wants to infiltrate every aspect of geopolitics. Now is the time. It's time for a realignment that China has spoken about. You know, for 100 years, we need to do the same. We need to be the greatest country in the world again.
At the start of your speech, you said that this is China's 2008, talking about the economy. How likely are we to see protests erupt in China due to the economic situation?
We know the Chinese people are unhappy. They're very gloomy, and we can see this from all sorts of indications. Generally, gloomy people don't start protests. But we've also witnessed, for instance, in October 2022, a series of extraordinary protests that started in Zhengzhou in the central part of China. So we know that the situation in China is volatile. And although people right now seem to be very pessimistic, that could turn into anger at any moment, because Chinese society has always been volatile because of the repression. Repression works until it doesn't. And that's what we have seen throughout Chinese history, and not just the history of the communist era. That goes all the way back through millennia of imperial rule.
You had a book signing here right after you concluded your remarks and the questions. Tell me about the new book.
Yeah, it's Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. And what I do is I go through the basis of China's hostility and maliciousness. And it's not just against the United States, but of course primarily against us, because they see us as the main obstacle to their worldwide rule. Remember, China doesn't talk about domination or hegemony or control. They want to annex the world. This is going back to the imperial era notions of Tianxia, that they have the mandate of heaven to rule Tianxia, or all under heaven. And it's not just that heaven gives them the right to do it, but that heaven compels them to do it. So they've got to eliminate all other competing sources of power in the world. And the United States is their #1 target.
Gordon Chang's book, Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, is available for purchase on Amazon.com. Chris Bobb, NTD News, New York.
The communist-controlled newspaper China Daily will no longer be distributed on Capitol Hill. Congress members say they worked with national news to stop China Daily's circulation after lawmakers raised concerns. China Daily is one of several major state mouthpieces controlled by the CCP's Central Propaganda Department. The publication's Chinese website says its English edition actively publicizes and explains Xi Jinping thought on socialism. It also says it strives to influence public opinion in favor of communist-ruled China. Its U.S. distributor, China Daily Distribution Corporation, has been registered as a foreign agent in the United States since 1983 under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Next, a long-awaited homecoming gets one step closer to coming true. SpaceX is slated to blast off on a rescue mission tonight to carry 4 stranded astronauts back to Earth. How are people reacting to the news? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from them.
SpaceX today is sending a crew to rescue our stranded astronauts. They've been up there since last June, so what's your reaction hearing this?
I think it's amazing that they've been up there that long and that we didn't have a plan to get them down sooner.
That is really, really sad, and I hope they get back here safe.
I've never heard anything like it.
Wait a minute, they've been out there since June. Hopefully they're back, by the grace of God. Hopefully they're alive and well and they come back safe and sound.
The International Space Station is fully equipped to support multiple astronauts for a long period of time. They've probably been having a blast.
Yeah, they're probably coming back with some plans to, for life moving forward. Some things they'll do a little bit differently, but
you use the gravity first, probably.
Yeah, they come back a little bit taller, a little bit less weight on their shoulders.
The quicker we get them home, the better I think everybody will be. I'm sure they're ready to get home.
Can you imagine what's it like being up there?
No, I could not. I know they've got food and water and survive, but I just can't imagine going up on a short trip and being there as long as they was.
Scary, lonely, boring.
I wouldn't know what to do with myself, stuck in just one place.
In space, I wouldn't be able to do that now.
Scary, shoot. Just being stuck in complete darkness and stars and the sun, of course. Infinite rock, paper, scissors.
I actually work in the aerospace industry, and I've talked to astronauts, and they love spending time in space.
And space is a great place for some quiet reflection, I would imagine. A vacuum. I'd pay good money, actually, as a middle-aged man to go sit in a vacuum for a couple of months.
What should be our next priority in space, in your opinion?
Our next priority definitely should be the safety, because if they're stuck up there, then, yeah, they got to focus more on, the departure and then the way to come back.
We got to get Artemis off the ground. We got to reduce cost on Artemis. It's very expensive to send Artemis. We need to come up with better ideas, I think.
It is probably the continuation or investigation into something that the general public doesn't have an idea of. I'm sure there are some things going on up there, either from the scientific level, military level.
I'm a Trek fan, a Trekkie, so I'm all about getting into space.
For sure. In our lifetime, though?
Well, I mean, that's not, right now with our technology, I don't think that's possible in our lifetime to get to the Star Trek world, but getting to Mars is definitely possible.
Coming up, President Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum went into effect today. But will the tariffs be effective in creating a level playing field for American workers, as Trump promised? An international politics analyst joins us to discuss that and the possible outcomes of Trump's broader trade policies. And year-over-year inflation is cooling. It came in lower than economists' expectations. That's partly due to falling energy costs. A breakdown of which goods and services are more or less expensive than last year when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump imposed sweeping 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imported into the U.S. today, a policy aimed at leveling the playing field for U.S. manufacturing. Within hours, Canada and the European Union retaliated with countermeasures. Joining us now to discuss the impact of these tariffs and Trump's broader trade policies is Anders Core. He's the publisher of the Journal of Political Risk and principal at Core Analytics. Anders, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, to start off, given these steel and aluminum tariffs kicking in today, who benefits?
Well, some U.S. companies will certainly benefit. You're going to see an uptick in the prices to steel and aluminum in the United States for the consumer, but there will be, some jobs created with the last tariffs that happened in 2018 on steel. For example, it created 1,000 steel jobs. The problem is that the downstream users of that steel, including car manufacturers, washing machine, major appliance users, according to the research, lost 75,000 jobs. So you have a 1 to 75 ratio in terms of gained jobs in the steel industry to lost jobs in the downstream U.S. industries.
Now, zooming out a bit, President Trump has been described as tough on China. Now, you've said that his latest move on tariffs brings that opinion into question. Expand on that for us.
Well, I mean, there's a concern that, targeting U.S. allies, whether they're in Europe or Canada, is problematic in terms of tariffs. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to tariff China because China is an adversary country. China is a long ways away. So if there was, say, a war with Taiwan, they could cut off our steel supply. We couldn't build Navy ships, for example. But with Canada, especially, I mean, they're right there. They're a close U.S. ally. They're in NATO. It just doesn't make a lot of economic or national security sense for most analysts when they look at this to impose such high tariffs.
I want to expand on that a bit because you've listed some things that Trump needs to do to actually be tough on China, like prioritizing North American supply chains and encouraging U.S. NATO-EU relations to stiffen Europe's spine against China. Now, President Trump argues that tariffs are ultimately meant to strengthen U.S. independence and enforce fairness in international trade. Is achieving that possible without using tariffs or tangible economic pressure on other nations?
As far as fairness, I mean, I think that in terms of the reciprocal tariffs, right? So I know that a while back there were tariffs the EU was imposing on U.S. vehicles, and we weren't imposing such high tariffs on the EU vehicles. So there is a case for that, and it should rapidly bring tariffs on both sides down. But with these steel tariffs, I just don't see the same kind of big argument in favor of them. I mean, also with so many tariffs being imposed all at once, I think there's a danger of sort of an economic shock to the U.S. economy because so many of the inputs of our industries are based on, foreign goods that flow into them, or in terms of our vehicles, our auto industry, these autos go back and forth. The parts go back and forth multiple times. Back and forth to Canada. And if you're tariffing them each time, then that whole supply chain is just going to break down and could seize up and freeze, basically.
Now, given all the tariffs we've seen coming out of this administration, you've questioned the national security angle of the tariffs on Canada and Mexico particularly. President Trump is saying that this is in response to these countries doing too little to stem the flow of fentanyl into the U.S., which has claimed tens of thousands of American lives. Now, in your view, what would count as a valid national security concern for these tariffs?
There's a stronger case for tariffs against Mexico because most of the fentanyl coming into the United States, most of the illegal immigrants coming into the United States are coming via Mexico. But with Canada, really just, the research says that just about 1% of the fentanyl, 1% of the illegal immigration is coming from Canada, and they're cooperating. Since early February, they've really increased their cooperation with the United States. I believe Mexico has increased its cooperation as well. So that needs to be taken into account. The changes that they're making do need to be taken into account.
And speaking of Canada, Canada's new prime minister said on Tuesday, quote, "My government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect and make credible, reliable commitments to free and fair trade." Now, perhaps in reference to Trump talking about Canada becoming the 51st state, given the slew of recent back and forth tariffs, where do you see U.S.-Canada relations going?
I actually think that Canada and Europe should potentially use the Aikido approach to tariffs, which is, if someone throws a hit at you, you just parry it and you don't necessarily have to strike back. Because tariffs really are Canadian tariffs are really going to hurt both sides. They're going to hurt Canada, they're going to hurt the United States. And I think they're just going to provoke Trump into probably worse moves and retaliation. So, my advice to the Europeans and to Canada is not to use retaliatory tariffs, but just to keep pointing out that the tariffs, when it comes to allies, tariffs hurt us all. When it comes to China, yes, impose tariffs, be tough, but I just don't see it with Canada and Europe.
A lot to watch out here for sure. Anders Kaur, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Some good news on the economy. Inflation is cooling in the U.S. One major factor, energy prices are falling. Our data reporter Kevin Hogan has the numbers. Kevin, what is the inflation rate?
U.S. annual inflation has come down to 2.8%, and that's 3% that it was just last month, but now it's coming down, so it's cooling off a little bit. we're getting a little bit of relief. Again, that doesn't mean that prices are necessarily falling. It just means they're not going up quite as fast. Now, let's take a look at the overview of inflation or deflation rates in the United States. This is the change in price going all the way back, about a decade or so. So you had a little bit of deflation around 2015, and then some normal inflation, 1% to 2%. That's pretty typical. You had the pandemic right here, big inflation, could be supply chain bottlenecks contributing to that. And right here, it's starting to come down. So I'll just draw. So we're definitely down off the peak right there, you can see, but also even just drawing this trend line out, it's coming down a little bit, which is some good news. So now the history, that's the history of inflation. Now we're going to look further into this, what the prices are changing. So all the items, that's the 2.8 top line number you saw. But now food, that's 2.8% more expensive than it was last year. So that's pretty on par with the overall inflation. But energy, you can see this is actually negative 0.2%. So that is bringing down the total inflation, cooling it off just a little bit. Now, pardon me. So this is gas prices. These are oil, things like that. All this is coming down just a bit, and that's down to about, that's coming down like 3% or so compared to last year. So that's a good news. You might see, you go to the pump, you might see that you're getting a little bit of relief from that same time in February last year, right? So this is all according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Again, this is the change in the Consumer Price Index. It's not adjusted for the seasonal adjustments, but we're not in a big holiday period right now, so that shouldn't make too much of a difference. And now these energy prices, when we break it down, the fuel oil, that's down 5%. This could be for industrial uses, things like that. So that's really bringing this overall energy price structure down. But gasoline, that's that 3% drop off that you see from last year. But you might notice that your electricity bill and your natural gas bill are a little bit more expensive. So that's the full breakdown of the energy. And we got to talk about food because everyone's got to eat, and food prices have been a really big sticking point, definitely for this administration, Trump administration, coming in a campaign on bringing some of these down. So the change in food prices, you may notice that if you eat at home, you're not spending quite as much money typically than if you dine out, because that's about twice as much. I mean, 2% of an increase from last year for the dining at home prices, but that's about 4% more. So again, almost double if you dine out. So you might be feeling that a little bit. And here's a breakdown of all the different food items that you may eat while you're at home. So everything from grains, that's pretty steady, hasn't changed that much. Fruits and veggies, they've actually dropped a little bit in price, so that's good. Keep you healthy, right? Now, the fish, meat, and those drinks, these are non-alcoholic drinks. That's where you're seeing a lot of these price pressures. But one area that you see huge increases in price, that's eggs. I mean, that just blows them all out of the water. That's almost a 60% increase in the price of eggs since last year. A lot of factors contributing to that. Now, when you look at every single good and service that the Bureau of Labor Statistics has data on, you see that egg prices are the ones that have gone up the most. That's about 60%. Everything out here, I mean, this is CDs. I don't know if anyone really uses CDs anymore, but CDs and other media, that's only at 20%, so that's the next in line. But all the rest of these, they're down about 5% at most. So eggs, that one just really stands out. Could be for a lot of reasons. Again, they've had that bird flu. They may have to kill off and cull their hens. And even Professor of Finance, Professor Jane at Rutgers, says that, that's going to take time to bounce back from. There's no immediate relief because you got to let these new hens hatch, and then you got to also do all that cleanup. So it could be a little while before we see those egg prices start to come down again. Back to you.
Coming up, criticism is intensifying over the Los Angeles mayor's handling of the wildfires with her absence during the crisis. We take a closer look at the growing calls for her removal and what's next for the mayor's campaign. And in golf news, will the PGA and LIV ever merge? Dave Martin joins us to discuss some of the possible pitfalls when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass is facing increasing pressure as a recall campaign gains momentum. The effort follows concerns over her response to the recent wildfires, including her absence during the crisis. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Mayor Karen Bass is facing a recall effort over her handling of the devastating wildfires. With her re-election approaching next year, she has already launched her campaign as criticism grows, including concerns over deleted text messages. The recall is led by Nicole Shanahan, the former running mate of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. According to the recall website, the campaign has received support from some Palisades residents. The recall effort requires 330,000 signatures within 4 months to move forward. Bass, who was up for re-election in 2026, confirmed to KNX News on Tuesday that she has already launched her campaign. Since the wildfires broke out in January, Bass has faced significant criticism for being in Ghana when they began. The Los Angeles Times has since requested the mayor's texts and emails from January 7th and January 8th. Bass's office informed the Times that they had no responsive records to comply with the request. Bass's office admitted her text messages were not saved due to an automatic 30-day deletion setting, which has since been turned off. A UC Berkeley LA Times poll found that 40% of respondents rated Bass's response to the wildfire as poor or very poor. 22% voted fair and 19% voted excellent/good. Concerns have also risen over low water pressure, fire hydrant issues, and limited fire department resources in the Palisades. Some officials, including the LA Firefighters Union, claim the fire department's budget was reduced by $17 million. However, Bass and city council members argue that the budget actually increased by $50 million due to a new firefighter contract. Several media outlets have submitted requests for her emails from around the time of the fires, but have been told it could take until June to receive them. Reporting from Los Angeles County, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the NFL as Bills quarterback Josh Allen commented on his record-breaking contract extension, saying he didn't want to kill the team's salary cap. What was he referring to?
Yeah, it seems hard to believe you could sign a record contract and not have it, affect your team's salary cap that much, especially in the NFL where they got a hard salary cap. His contract is 6 years, $330 million. Now, the record part is at $250 million of that guarantee. That's the most ever in the NFL. Now, the average annual salary is $55 million, which is tied for the second highest in the league. $5 million behind Dak Prescott. So it's a lot of money, but Allen is the reigning MVP and he's a quarterback. He would have been within his right to hold out for more than Dak Prescott is making. So at least relative to his worth anyway, he did give them a break. Now maybe it made a difference because the team already went out and signed free agent defenseman Joey Bosa already reportedly. If Bosa stays healthy, I think he's a great addition for the Bills defense. Maybe he could be the difference in them finally getting back to the Super Bowl and beating the Chiefs in the postseason, which hopefully we get a rematch of that game.
Looking at golf news, former PGA great Fred Couples recently said he believes that LIV golfer Brooks Koepka wants to come back to the PGA. Now, has Koepka responded, and where do these merger talks go?
Yeah, Koepka actually responded today earlier. Let's go ahead and play his comments right now if we can.
Yeah, I mean, everybody seems to have their own opinion. No one asked me. I mean, I talked to Fred quite a bit, but we don't go too much into detail about what's going on. Like I've said it before, I'm not in those rooms. I've got a contract obligation out here to fulfill, and then we'll see what happens. But I don't know where I'm going, so I don't know how everybody else does.
Yeah, so he kind of paints a different picture maybe than what Freddie Couples had said. He doesn't actually say Couples actually was wrong, whatever. He did say he's got a contract obligation to fulfill, and then he'll see what happens. Now, how big that contract is, that's been a big mystery. He left for the LIV back in 2022. Most of the golfers that went there, the major ones anyway, were reported to get 9-figure deals from LIV, and he's a major golfer himself. Now, regarding though the LIV PGA merger, it seems like eons ago that was announced. That was almost 2 years ago. I think it was June of 2023. Still more to be negotiated, apparently. LIV Golf is a team golf, which is totally different from PGA. I would think that's one of the sticking points there. Also, a big one is what we just discussed there. What about those players who left LIV for the PGA? If LIV is not going away, what happens to them and their contracts? That's another thing to consider too. Now, though LIV and PGA both were at the White House last month to continue these negotiations. Still, though, we have not got a resolution or actually a merger yet announced, so still ongoing with that.
Looking at college basketball tonight, all 4 of the power conferences have started their conference tournaments with your Kansas Jayhawks in action against UFC, looking to boost their resume.
Yeah, they could definitely use a boost right now. I mean, they started the season off #1. They beat Duke, North Carolina, and Michigan State in like the first few weeks of the season. It has been downhill ever since. I don't even think anyone can put their finger on what the problem is. I mean, we normally see them win so much under Bill Self. They did beat UCF, who they played tonight earlier this season, beaten by 51 points. But so you never know which KU team is going to show up. Now, elsewhere today, North Carolina beat Notre Dame by 20 points at the ACC tournament. They're actually another team that was highly ranked at the season start, but then they lost a bunch of games, fell out of the rankings. They actually, though, they played very well Saturday against Duke, led them for a while in the second half, and they had won 6 straight up to that point. So anyway, North Carolina now will play Wake Forest tomorrow. But anyway, the power conferences tonight, the ACC, the Big 12, the Big 10, and the SEC, all have conference games going on tonight. Only one of the teams is ranked, actually Iowa State, which earlier won in the Big 12. But tomorrow, a whole bunch of ranked teams to be playing, so it should be a lot of fun then too.
So a follow-up tomorrow. Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.